Hey folks, hope you're doing well. So today we'll be taking a look at the Roman religious system. We'll be looking at the chief founding myth of Rome, some of the general characteristics, the general structure, the main gods, and how they evolved over time, in particular due to certain crises that Rome had faced. And then finally we'll end with the suppression of the Bacchanalia in 186 BC. So before we get into the founding story, it's important to take a look at the mythic events that preceded the birth of Rome, which emphasize the fusion of two entirely distinct ethnic groups. The Latin stock, from which the Roman people came, resulted from a mixture of the autochthonous Neolithic population with Indo-European invaders who came down from the Transalpine region. This first synthesis would serve as the exemplary model for the process of assimilation and religious integration that continued until the end of the empire. So when we look at the earliest Roman triad of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus, we see that it expresses the tripartite ideology found among many other Indo-European people. We see the function of the magical and juridical sovereignty in Jupiter, as it can be seen in Varuna, Mitra, and Odin. The gods of warlike force in Mars, Indra, and Thor, and finally the divinities of fecundity and economic prosperity in Quirinus and Frey. This functional triad constituted the ideal model for the tripartite division of Indo-European societies into three classes: priests, warriors, and stock breeders. In Rome, the social tripartite structure was disrupted early, but the corresponding structure remained in religion and legend. So taking a look at that legend, we'll look at the foundation of Rome, which according to the historians, Numitor, king of Alba, was deposed by his brother Amulius. To consolidate his rule, Amulius slaughtered Numitor's sons and forced his daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin. But Silvia was already pregnant by Mars and gave birth to two sons, Romulus and Remus. Exposed on the bank of the river Tiber, the twins were miraculously suckled by a she-wolf and were rescued by a shepherd. Having grown to manhood, Romulus and Remus obtained the recognition of their grandfather, and after doing away with the usurper, re-established Numitor to his throne. They left Alba to found a city where they had spent their childhood. To consult the gods, Romulus chose the Palatine, while Remus took his station on the Aventine Hill. It was Remus who first saw the augural sign, a flight of 6 vultures, but Romulus saw 12, and to him fell the honor of founding the city. With a plow, Romulus drew a furrow around the Palatine. He declared that the turned-up earth represented the future walls. The furrow symbolized the moat, and the plow indicated the future site of a gate. But Remus, in order to mock him, jumped over the so-called wall and moat in one leap. Romulus then jumped on him and killed him, saying, "So perish whoever henceforth crosses my walls." Now, the mythological characteristic of this narrative is overflowing with mythic themes. The theme of exposure of newborn infants is found in the legends of Moses, Sargon, and Cyrus. The she-wolf that was sent by Mars to nourish the twins foreshadowed the warlike vocation of the Romans. Being exposed and then fed by a beast signifies an initiatory ordeal that a hero had to complete. Being raised by poor and humble folks ignorant of their destiny is also a very common theme. And so, as in so many mythological systems, the founding of a city represents a repetition of a cosmogenic act. The sacrifice of Remus reflects the primordial sacrifice of the type exemplified by Purusha, Ymir, and Panku. Immolated on the site of Rome, Remus ensures the fortunate future of the city. Despite the fratricide, Romulus would become exemplary in the consciousness of the Romans as the founder, legislator, warrior, and priest of their city. One of the main characteristic features of the Roman religious genius is its ametaphysical tendency and its realistic vocation. You can easily be struck by the passionate religious interest of Romans in the immediate realities of life and history, by the importance they attributed to unusual phenomena, and by the solemn confidence they had in the power of rites. The ametaphysical tendencies and keen interest in immediate realities are easily revealed in the Roman attitude towards anomalous phenomena. The ideal norm was manifest in the orderly succession of seasons and in the regularity of the annual cycle. Any radical disruption in the created order constituted an attack on the norm. In short, the danger of return to chaos. Such events represented a crisis in the relations between men and gods. Aberrant phenomena was a prophetic sign whose precise meaning was not obvious and required professional interpretation to be deciphered. Now, at first, this may sound superstitious, but it in fact represents a special type of religious experience where the dialogue between gods and men took place through unusual manifestations. This attitude is a result of the Roman valorization of natural realities, human activities, and historical events. Now, the Roman religious genius is distinguished by pragmatism, the search for effectiveness, and above all, by the sacralization of organic collectives, the family and the fatherland. The famous Roman discipline, their honoring of obligations, their devotion to the state, and the religious prestige they attributed to law came at the expense of the human person. The individual mattered only insofar as he belonged to his group. It was not until the influence of Greek philosophy and Oriental cults of salvation that the Romans discovered the religious importance of the person. The social character of the Roman religiosity can be seen in the term pietas, which means not only scrupulous observance of rites, but also respect for natural relationships. For a son, pietas consists in obeying his father. Disobedience is a monstrous act, contrary to natural order, and the guilty son must expiate his defilement by his own death. There was pietas to the gods, pietas towards members of the groups to which one belonged to, towards the city, and finally pietas to all human beings. The law of peoples, the jus gentium, prescribed duties even to foreigners. Now, the Roman system was divided between a public side and a private side. The public cult was controlled by the state and was celebrated by a certain number of officiants and religious brotherhoods. In the period of the monarchy, the king held the highest rank in the priestly hierarchy as the rex sacrorum, the king of the sacred. In the regia, or in the king's house, three categories of rites were performed dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, and to the goddess of agricultural abundance, Ops. The king's house was the meeting place and synthesizing agent of the tripartite function. It's probable that the rex was surrounded by a body of priests, just as the Vedic Rajan and his chaplain, and the Irish Ree and his druids were surrounded. Unlike Vedic India and the Celts, where priests were interchangeable and able to celebrate any ceremony, in Rome every priest had a specific competence. After the Rex there followed the priestly hierarchy of the 15 flamens. The first major flamens were those of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinius. Each flamen was autonomous and attached to the god from whom he took his name. The institution is archaic, and the flamens were distinguished by their ritual costumes and by a large number of prohibitions. The flamen Dialis, dedicated to Jupiter, could not leave Rome nor wear anything knotted. If a prisoner in chains were to manage to enter his house, he had to be set free. He must not appear under the sky naked or see the army or ride horseback. So, many taboos and prohibitions for the flamen. The flamens performed their rites, the, the flamens performed their regular duties, but had no power to interpret or resolve new situations. It was the Pontifex Maximus, who had a complementary function to the Rex in the Pontifical College, and enjoyed both freedom and initiative. The pontifex was present at meetings at which religious acts were decided and had control of festivals. There were also 6 vestals attached to the pontifical college. These were chosen by the Pontifex Maximus from among virgins between the ages of 6 and 10 and were consecrated for a period of 30 years. They safeguarded the Roman people by keeping alight the fire of the city, which they must never allow to go out. Their religious power depended on their virginity. If a vestal failed in chastity, she was buried alive in a tomb, and her sexual partner was executed. The augural college was ancient and independent as the pontifical college. Their job was to determine the will of the gods, whether the choice of a cult site or a religious function was proper. With the passing of time, certain divinatory techniques of Greek or Etruscan origin were introduced. The method of haruspices, which consisted of examining entrails of victims, was entirely of Etruscan origin. Now, unlike the Greek gods, who had early organized a well-defined pantheon, the Romans at the beginning of the historical period had only a single hierarchical group, the archaic triad of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus, followed by Janus and Vesta. Now, there is no doubt concerning the archaic character of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus. The statutes and functions of the 3 major flamens indicate the structure of the gods for whom they were responsible. Jupiter is above all the sovereign god, the thunderer, the source of the sacred, and the regent of justice. Mars, the god of war, and Quirinus, the god of fecundity. Janus and Vesta, being added later, follows the Indo-European religious tradition. In the temporal cycle, Janus governs the beginning of the year, and spatially he is at the threshold of houses and gates. He is depicted as two-faced because every passage supposes 2 states, the one that is left and the one that is entered. Vesta derives from an Indo-European root meaning to burn, the perpetual fire of the ignis vestae, and only the sanctuary of Vesta was round. All other temples were quadrangular. All temples had to be inaugurated and oriented in accordance with the 4 celestial directions, except for the house of Vesta, which was not to be inaugurated because all the power of the goddess is from the earth. Her sanctuary was an aedis sacra and not a templum. Vesta was not represented by an image, for fire was the only image sufficient to represent her. During the Etruscan domination, the old triad of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus was replaced by the triad Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The Etruscan Latin influence also brings with it some Greek elements. The divinities now have statues. Jupiter is represented under the Etruscan image of the Greek god Zeus, and Juno is often seen as the most important Roman goddess, but also the most disconcerting. Her name derives from a root that expresses vital force. Her functions were many. She ruled over various festivals of fertility, but she was also connected with the beginning of the months. Juno was associated with 3 functions of Indo-European ideology: sacred royalty, military force, and fertility. She is the goddess who assumes all 3 functions and reconciles them, thus constituting the model of woman in Roman society. Minerva was the patroness of arts and artisans. Her name is probably Italic and derived from the Indo-European root min, meaning mental activity. Now, the transformations, in particular certain events. The invasion of the Celts during the first quarter of the 4th century had interrupted contact with Hellenism. The devastation of Rome in circa 390 was so thorough that some Romans thought of abandoning the city entirely to rebuild elsewhere. The burning of the city shook the Romans' confidence in their historical destiny. It was not until after the victory of Sentinum in 295 that Rome and Italy freed themselves from Gallic dominion. When the Second Punic War threatened the very existence of the Roman state, religion underwent a transformation in depth. Rome appealed to all the gods, wherever their origin. The Haruspis and the Sibylline books reveal that the cause of military disaster lay in the ritual faults of various kinds. Obeying the Sibylline books, the Senate promulgated severe measures: sacrifices, ceremonies, unusual processions, and even human sacrifices. The disaster at Cannae in 216, made all the more threatening by incest being committed by two Vestals, pushed the Senate to consult the oracle at Delphi. At Rome, the Sibylline books prescribed human sacrifices. 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls were burned alive. Finally, in 205 BC, on the eve of the victory over Hannibal and following the Sibylline books, Rome introduced the first Asiatic divinity, Cybele, or Cybele, the great mother of Passanante. The famous black stone symbolizing the goddess was brought to Pergamum by a Roman fleet solemnly received. Cybele was installed in her temple on the Palatine. The austere Romans, however, were disturbed by the orgiastic nature of the cult, and above all, by the presence of eunuch priests. The Senate was quick to regulate the cult. Sacrifices were strictly confined to the interior of the temple, except for an annual procession. Roman citizens were forbidden to sacrifice to Cybele according to the Anatolian rite, and the personnel were limited to a priest, a priestess, and their assistants, but no Roman nor their slaves were allowed to perform these functions. In short, the first introduction of an Asiatic divinity was the work of aristocrats, but Cybele's presence had no consequences. The invasion of Oriental mystery cults would occur about a century later. After the suffering and terror of the Second Punic War, Rome was open to Asiatic divinities. The Romans felt the need to control foreign cults, but at the same time feared losing their benefits. The consequences of the wars was unavoidable. On one hand, a considerable number of refugees from all regions gathered in Rome, and on the other hand, certain segments of the population increasingly broke away from traditional religion. In Rome from the 4th century on, the need for a personal religious experience became more and more intense. Such a religious experience could be found in the secret associations of the mystery cults. In 186 BC, the Roman authorities discovered with surprise and indignation the existence in Rome itself of Bacchanalia, that is, of the nocturnal orgiastic mysteries associated with the widely disseminated cult of Dionysius. A denunciation was made public by the council, and an investigation revealed 7,000 adherents who were accused of pederasty, ritual murder, and other abominations. Livy records men that, tossing their bodies like they were demented, and women dressed on Bacchantes with disheveled hair, would run into the Tiber carrying torches. The severity of the suppression and several thousand executed showed the political nature of the persecution, and 3 centuries later would serve as a model for the persecution of Christians.